They discovered that for the tasks that were within AI's capabilities, employees completed 12.5% more tasks, 25% more quickly, with a 40% higher quality metric.
Wow.
Exude Human Capital hosts Hold On, Let Me Close My Door, bringing real HR stories from real professionals with real solutions to you. Join us as we navigate the ever-changing workplace with Allison DeFlorio, co-founder and managing partner, Exude Human Capital, and special guests. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode from Hold On, Let Me Close My Door. I'm Allison DeFlorio, co-founder and managing partner of Exude Human Capital, and I'm joined by one of our fabulous consultants and training experts, Doug May, as my co-host today. Hi, Doug.
Hi, Allison. It's great to be here today.
Yeah, I think this is our first podcast of 2024.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining me for this one.
I'm excited. It's going to be a great podcast today.
Yeah. For those of you that have listened before, you know that we try to bring topics that are of interest to people in the business community, those who touch HR, those who really think about anything people. And today we have a topic that I'm sure is front of mind of many of you on listening. And it's around AI and how AI is being used specifically in HR, but specifically in the areas of learning and development. And I am so excited to have as our guest today the original AI whisperer, John Hack, Chief Technology Officer of a really interesting company called Interflection. John, welcome to Hold On, Let Me Close My Door.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Allison. I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
You know, John, I've known you now for, 4 years, 5 years. And every time I talk with you, I learn a little bit more about your background and the experience that you've had in the AI space before many of us actually even knew the term. So I would love for you to share a little bit about your background and how you got into this and a little bit about Interflection.
Sure. I, as an undergraduate at MIT long ago, was intrigued by linguistics and computer science and started studying AI. My first job that did not involve hamburgers or dirty dishes was working in the natural language processing group at Wang Laboratories, basically trying to do what took decades to accomplish. And while AI wasn't quite ready for its close-up at that time, I ended up shifting most of my career into performance management and analytics, doing more and more robust projects around how do we improve organizational performance, how do we improve financial, operational, and ultimately human performance, which is the driver of all those other metrics that are important to business. Fast forward, to about 4 or 5 years ago when we first met, Allison, and my partner and co-founder of Interflection, John Muldoon, and I were looking at, on behalf of a client, the use of VR in corporate training. And we walked away from that experience saying, you know what? Conversations are really the most important part of what happens in the workplace. Those are the skills that are very hard to teach. If we could scale that using AI, that would be a tremendous benefit to a large number of organizations. And that was the genesis of Interflection. And that's what I've been working on for the last few years. And that's how we met, was your interest in improving conversations as well.
Absolutely. And thank you for that history. I think one of the things that I have always found so interesting about the work that you and John Muldoon are doing is how you can reinforce key learning concepts and even more importantly, give individuals real-time practice and real-time feedback to really hone those skills. And Doug, I know you've done a lot of training in this space, particularly around managing conflict and handling and effective communication skills. What are your thoughts on how AI can reinforce learning?
Well, it's interesting. I want to tell you one thing, John. I remember the first computer I used in the workplace was a Wang. So when you said Wang Laboratories, I thought, oh my gosh, I remember the discs were huge. Remember how big the
8-inch floppies. Yeah.
So it was insane. But anyway, so I have a question. My question is around how do we incorporate it into learning in the workplace? How do you see it? Do you see it in the training class as a support to the training class? How do you see it working there?
I see it as 3 different distinct domains.
Sure.
The first is, how can AI help the training organization more efficiently and effectively develop training materials?
Oh, cool.
And I'll talk more about that in a moment.
Okay.
The second is, what is happening in the business? How are the other functional units in the organization using AI, and how is it changing not only what they do, but how they do it and the skills required to succeed? And then the third area, sort of like the third level, is how do you creatively employ, and I think this was where you were going with your question, how do you employ AI to more effectively and creatively deliver and enhance the learning experience? So, with that in mind, I think it's worth probably going a little bit deeper into each of those 3 areas.
That would be great.
So I would encourage starting with, how can learning and development professionals use AI to enhance what they already do?
Mm-hmm.
I have heard anecdotally, and I've seen in my own work, that it can jumpstart a lot of the work that's done in creating material. It's a great drafter of V1 of a lot of material, and it is surprisingly knowledgeable. A little later, we're going to talk about dangers and ethics and all of that stuff. So I want to put that caveat in here at the beginning. This is not like all glorious roses, unicorns, and rainbows.
Yeah.
But if you use it effectively for a first draft, you can cut the amount of time it takes to create curriculum from scratch by almost an order of magnitude. It won't, anyone listening to this podcast, if you have not tried this, I highly recommend getting a free account. Doesn't matter, ChatGPT, Bing, Claude, whatever. Ask it to create an 8-week course for customer service representatives working in a call center.
Wow. How cool is that?
And then
Actually amazing.
Yeah.
and you will be amazed at what it comes back with. You will, if you have not done this before, your eyebrows will hit your hairline when you see what comes back.
Interestingly, truth be told, we're going to confess something to you. As we were thinking about what should we call this podcast today, we were kind of struggling with it. What should we call this? And Doug, what did you do?
I went to Claude and I asked Claude, because I have an experience with Claude, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit, John. And I said, what should we call this podcast? Well, Claude came up with all kinds of answers. And then I wanted to go deeper, as you were talking about. And I said, well, it's going to be about this. And then he came up with a whole bunch more answers. And at the end, this is what is so cool, John. He kept saying, can I explain any of these more to you? How I came up with this idea? And I was like, this is crazy, crazy cool. So,
yeah, and I'll be talking a little bit more later about impacts on productivity if we have time, but absolutely do that. And you can go a lot deeper into these questions. So if you're developing curriculum, you can say, okay, that's my 8-week course. Can you come up with a detailed syllabus? Great.
Wow.
Okay, for each week, can you recommend a voiceover that would correspond to presenting that material? If you wanted to make this an online course, you could then ask a different AI to create a PowerPoint presentation to go along with that material. And then you could take the voiceover and you could have an avatar present the material as an embodied person and completely create all of the online material. You could ask it to create a multiple choice test for you. And it'll create multiple choice tests or essay question tests that correspond to the material. Almost anything you can imagine doing in a traditional online or in-person course, these technologies can give you a reasonable first draft that jumpstarts the entire program from start to finish.
And it sounds, I'm doing kind of the math in my head as you're speaking through this. This sounds like within a couple of hours, you have V1, version 1.
I have created an online, it wasn't polished enough to really put out into the world, but in an hour, I created the first section of a training from start to finish, including the video and the PowerPoint and everything. Yeah.
Wow.
You could definitely jumpstart the whole program that way. And it has some other benefits. You can take this material as preparation for your conversations with subject matter experts. You can then bring this material to subject matter experts and say, what's right and what's wrong about this? So you're not necessarily relying on subject matter experts to do that initial bootstrapping. People often are much more comfortable criticizing existing material than they are creating it fresh. Right? It's only natural.
Right. They're actually joyful about criticizing things at times.
Yeah.
Yes, they relish the opportunity.
They love typos.
Yes. So this may be a good time to talk about sort of the limitations and things to be concerned about, right? One is well, before we get there, let's talk a little bit about how this stuff actually works. What is it really doing? Right. So can we play a game just a moment?
Oh yeah,
no, absolutely.
So we love games.
So
we love them.
I just want you to respond with the first thing that comes to your mind when I say Marco.
Polo.
Exactly. You now know how AI works.
Oh,
that's the generative AI has been programmed with huge statistical models representing statistical relationships between words. And
that's neat.
I have gone to ChatGPT and typed Marco ! And it comes back and says polo. So that is what it's doing. It knows that that's the most common response to that prompt. And when you give it a more complex prompt, like, can you develop curriculum for, safety in nuclear plants, it can use that as okay, here are all the words that are most highly correlated with that thing.
Wow.
Fascinating.
And it's fascinating, but it also doesn't know reality from anything else.
Okay.
It's sometimes called hallucinations in the AI world. I think of them more as fabrications. It will make stuff up. There have been at least 2 cases that I know of where lawyers asked for help on a case. One involving litigation with an airline, and the other involving a trial involving Michael Cohen, the former attorney, the former president. And it came back with case law. Hey, there was the case of, Hatfield versus McCoy, and this is all of what happened. And because you asked it to give you a case, it gave you a case. But that case never actually took place. It completely made that up. And they filed that with the court. And judges looked dimly upon fabricated evidence in court.
And I would guess so.
I remember reading about that one, and I think it actually even caused the individual to be disbarred. I'm not quite sure about that, but
I don't know what the final, but certainly it was not a good career move by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
And this goes to, broadly across many different domains. If you're asking it to do, nuclear safety related stuff, you want your nuclear safety expert to look over what it produces,
right.
And use your common sense with it. The second, and sort of related, is that this stuff is trained on a huge amount of data, most of it coming from the internet.
Mm-hmm.
There is a natural bias in the selection. Just if you select everything on the internet, it's going to be skewed in a particular direction. A really good example is a clock with an analog clock face. All the images that it hoovered up were set to 10:10 in the morning or the afternoon, or the evening, and it's very hard to get an image generated to create a clock that isn't set at 10:10, because it's only been trained on clocks set to 10:10. It's a very odd artifact, and I can't do this visually, but if you ask for images, I use all image generation in my presentations now. It's faster, it's more precise. It's just easier than doing searches for images or creating them in Photoshop. But if I ask for a boardroom with executives seated around a table, I get all white men.
Oh, wow.
By default. That's the default.
Yeah.
I ask for a diverse group and I specify in more detail what I'm looking for, it will give that to me. But, I think that reflects a lot of the real world, that
True.
The default is a certain demographic. And if you want to change that demographic, you have to specifically work harder to get there.
Mm.
When you ask for very specific things, you sometimes get stereotyped or exaggerated, caricatured imagery, other things. So it's really important to look for hidden bias in the output and use your critical thinking faculties, especially with image generation.
That's really interesting, John. I have not yet used AI for image generation, but I do think when I look at training materials, obviously we look at that through that lens of inclusion and diversity to make sure that all learners are going to be represented in the visuals.
Exactly right. And it requires extra effort. Mm-hmm. It's not going to give you that by default.
Uh-huh.
There was the infamous case about 10 years ago now. I'd have to check the dates. Microsoft Tay, T-A-Y, was an AI that could learn how to behave and was a Twitter bot. And the idea was they were going to put Tay out onto the Twitter, and it would learn how to interact on Twitter by interacting with everybody else on Twitter. And within about 24 hours, it became a hate-spewing Nazi. And it just, the dynamic of, those were the agents that were most willing to interact and had, automatically, new people coming on, they would be going after it. Anyway, Microsoft had to shut it down after a day. And, so there is a natural tendency on the internet for things to become more extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the whole eyeballs thing. So, be very careful as to, the models that you're choosing and how they're regulated. I think you'll find most of the major ones do a pretty good job of limiting the degree to which these things surface, but ultimately it's our responsibility to monitor and modify as need be.
Yeah, great point. I know that I've also heard and read of stories where there has been, unintended plagiarism because AI will give information that was actually a direct quote or attributing direct quotes to the wrong people. Has that come up at all in your work?
I haven't really come across it, but I don't know, right? If it generates some material about training in the workplace, do I know if they took that from some publicly available website that was making that available? And now, we know as people who've been in the field a while, when people get trained on, say, how to give feedback as a manager,
Right.
There aren't that many different models for feedback. There's a lot of similarity there, right? So, there's that commonality stuff, and that's fine. But the plagiarism stuff, I have not come across anything that I knew about. But again, very careful. I always attribute when I'm using AI that I've done so, and I would highly recommend that anyone using AI do that. If you use the output and you've combed through it and changed it, and you own it, then I don't think you necessarily need to say, hey, version 1 of this thing was strapped with AI, and now it's our product. But if you're generating images, for example, or you're quoting large blocks of text verbatim, I think it's important to let folks know that you're using it and that it's part of your workflow.
John, can I ask you a question about the data? Because if something's behind a paywall, does AI have access to that, or is it really just whatever is open to the general public?
The big AI model vendors do not disclose the materials that have been used to train their models.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Okay.
It's a good question, though. One thing you should be aware of is that anything you feed into as a prompt or a question can be used unless you negotiate with that vendor specifically not to train the model further. It's very common. You can upload documents or large chunks of text and ask the AI to summarize it for you. That can be very helpful if you need a quick summary of something. I found that to be not necessarily the best way to learn, sort of like reading the Cliff's Notes version, the original masterpiece, but it's still something you can do. A lot of companies are using ChatGPT, especially in HR, actually, to upload all of their employee guidance information. Where do I go to get my benefits package? And, what do I do in the event of X and all that into one of these models, and then make that a much more intelligent chat that helps the frontline employees get an initial service from HR without having to have a big phone center. Be aware, though, that you don't want to put anything that's really proprietary or sensitive up there, employee names and phone numbers. Do not do that.
That would be a disaster.
Yeah, and there's HIPAA violations.
Right.
All sorts of things can go wrong if that happens.
Yeah, and just that said, I can't help the HR in me is going to put the cautionary note out to all listeners right now. Be sure before you introduce these ChatGPT and all of these other AI tools to your employees that you update your policies and that you have processes in place so that people are very clear on how to use it, when to use it, and what is appropriate, what is not appropriate with regards to proprietary company information.
And Allison, that's a great transition to sort of like the next stage for HR and learning and development, which is what do you do to help the employees in the organization become better at their jobs? So I do believe that this is the kind of technology that it's important, unlike, say, a new programming language, where it's not really important that HR and L&D become, experts in the latest, TypeScript version. With AI, because it's so profoundly affecting the way that people work, and it's going to affect the way that everyone in the organization works, you need to get on top of it yourself. But that puts you in a position to go out there and say, hey, we can help train the organization in the appropriate use of this technology within the organization.
Cool.
So, you can take a leadership position around, the ethical and responsible use of the AI. You can do some, how to do prompting for different organizations and how to look for bias. Because first you've experienced it yourself, you've worked through that. You can ask the technology to write this whole course for you, by the way, so you don't have to do this from scratch. The AI will teach you to do that, give you all the materials you need. It's kind of weird that way. But this is an opportunity for you to reach out and start to have that important influence on how people are working. I've had a number of conversations with friends and neighbors, casual acquaintances. Everybody almost is using it in some way or another on the job. So a neighbor who works in marketing, she's using it to process large amounts of written feedback during brand analysis surveys that they're doing on behalf of clients. Now, she did a lot of the interviews. She knows the material, but writing up the summary saves her like 4 hours to create the first draft of the summary of, hundreds of interviews. Another gentleman who could not get a programmer in his budget is asking Copilot to write the code for him.
Wow.
And again, that code needs to be modified. But some large companies like ServiceNow, very large workplace automation company, announced in their quarterly earnings just, I think, earlier this week that they have seen a huge increase in developer productivity through the use of AI. So the question then becomes, what does the skill set look like in the IT department if programmers are learning how to prompt the technology to write the code, and then they have to do QA and integration on the code rather than writing code from scratch themselves? That has an influence on onboarding. It has an influence on the training, the hiring processes. It's a very broad-based change that's going to come about as a result of the technology coming into play. And I'm going to share an anecdote here that you might find interesting. I was on a Zoom call this morning with a technology partner, and it was a very hardcore technology conversation. It was recorded by and analyzed by an AI at the end of the meeting, and the AI came back with technology recommendations, including code, to address the issues that we were discussing on the call.
Oh my goodness.
So how do you prepare your workforce for these kinds of, I'm gonna make the call here, robot coworkers?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, you have me thinking also, just as technology continues to embrace and utilize more AI surveys. You talked about the example of your neighbor who had the open-ended questions, evaluated through HR. I would imagine survey tools will embed that into their tools in the very near future, saving hours of time of analysis of open-ended survey questions.
Yeah, it's possible that they've even already announced it and I just didn't know, right?
I don't know. I haven't heard it either, but it doesn't surprise me. But for the potential issue of individual comments becoming part of a public domain, I mean,
Right.
that could be one of the issues.
Right. That could be an issue. Yeah, you're
But
right.
again, there are ways of protecting that data. That's just not the default. If you get a free account, you're not protected.
Right.
That is, the more you pay, the more protected you're likely to be. But you have to be really attentive to that. I know ChatGPT has like personal, and then the paid premium, and then there's like an enterprise, and the enterprise deal is where you can get the protections and so forth. So, and that's true for others as well.
I read a quote, and I'm going to butcher it a bit. I don't remember it exactly in preparation for this call. And it was a comment by someone in the financial space saying the only danger of AI is to those who choose not to use it. And I just ask for your reaction, because that's a little loaded there.
Right.
Yeah. The whole issue of technological unemployment is a really big one. It's real. I think there are people who are whistling past the graveyard on this one. And there's a long history of this being a concern. I just a couple of days ago read Carl Compton, who's president of MIT, an article he wrote in 1938 about technological unemployment and about all of the people who work in creating magnesium-based chemicals that are used for flash powder and photography are losing their jobs to the people who make flash bulbs that you can put into your camera, and they're easier, faster, and more disposable. And so it's not really a new problem in the world, but it's one that we're going to have to be attentive to. And the way for HR and L&D professionals to think about this, and I think it's a great question, because this is an audience that is very much in a place to make a difference in how this plays out. AI is not going to replace people. It's not like Allison is going to find a robot at her desk one morning when she comes in, and there'll be a pink slip for her in the mailbox. But it takes on tasks.
Right.
So that instructional designer who was overworked now has free capacity. If you've got 10 people in in a group, and each of them has a 30% lighter workload, you only need 7 people in that group.
Right.
So what do you do with that excess capacity? I was trained when I was in management school that these are people who know your organization, know your products, know your culture. You find something where they can add value and generate more revenue or do something productive.
Right.
That's not always the attitude of management. That's not always possible. But I think there's an opportunity here to look at the mix of skills required. And there are, aside from HR and L&D, IT is the only other group within the company that tends to know all of the processes and skill sets of everybody else.
Right.
So especially if you're appropriately partnered with your technology folks, you're in a position to help redefine, okay, what does the new workflow look like out there if our marketing people are generating first drafts of press releases and marketing collateral, and they're analyzing survey results, and they're doing all of this work leveraging AI? What can we do with the people who have excess capacity? what other ways can they contribute to the organization? And if you know their skill sets and you know where there are skill shortages elsewhere in the organization, there's an opportunity there for you to both be part of the re-engineering, if I may use a 1990s term, that is going to take place one way or the other.
Right.
You can be part of making that happen, or you can watch it happen. And you probably don't want to be the person watching it happen.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. I do think this really gives organizations an opportunity to reimagine how work gets done. And I think it's coming at a time. I mean, I know it's been evolving for years, but it feels like it's just accelerated in the last couple of years. At the same time, when the pandemic hit and how work gets done was changing in a different way as well. So I think it's an interesting time as employers are thinking about how do we redefine how work gets done and who does the work, to incorporate some of the things that you've spoken about today, and really to consider how AI could play a role in your organization with regards to how work gets done.
And with that in mind, I want to share one thing that I think is really significant. And it was a study that was done at a large professional services firm on productivity for people using AI. So they had, a control group not using AI. They had a group who were using AI after having been trained on using AI, and they had a group that was using AI without any training. And what they found was that there are tasks for which AI was good and tasks for which it was not good. So what they found, and this was this was involved over 400 employees that they were studying in this, and they discovered that for the tasks that were within AI's capabilities, employees completed 12.5% more tasks, 25% more quickly, with a 40% higher quality metric.
Wow.
Hmm.
Now, those are the kind of numbers that if you, as a learning and development organization, went to the CFO and said, look what our AI program has done, that would be a good conversation to have, right?
Yeah, he'd be a happy camper leaving that office.
Those are truly astonishing numbers. And if you're a big organization, like I said, this was a study with hundreds of people. If you're talking about that level of performance increase, however, and there's always a however, right? If the task was outside AI's capabilities, so it wasn't just creating the first draft of a report, for example,
right,
but it was trying to, say, do strategy consulting, they still completed the tasks more quickly, in the same range of 25% more quickly, but with a 19% decrease in quality.
Wow.
Interesting.
That's very interesting.
So knowing the strong points and the weak points of where AI is effective is going to be really important in your program rollout. The last thing I want to mention about this study that I think is really fascinating is that underperformers benefited much more from AI assistance than high performers.
Interesting.
They do not know why.
I was going to ask you why.
They didn't. They discovered this, but they didn't. The study wasn't set up to discover why. I have a theory, and it has to do with creating that first draft.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that high performers are often really good at writing that summary report because they're better at just holding all the material in their head and looking for patterns and those sorts of things. Whereas the underperformers, who are still good people, just take longer to work through that exercise and struggle with it more. And just having it do that initial work really made a bigger difference in their overall personal performance than it did for the high performers.
That you just made me think of a quote that I saw on your website, on Interflection's website, that would seem appropriate based on what you just said. If it's helping underperformers more, right? You say, you describe Interflection as AI-powered role play that help professionals become the best versions of themselves.
That's exactly our goal and it's not just underperformers, of course, but also the people who have not had access to the kinds of interpersonal skills and conversational skills coaching that is often given to the high performers. Doesn't mean that the high performers don't benefit from it or that everybody else wouldn't, but everybody else just isn't getting that. And it's a way of giving everyone a chance to, wouldn't you want everybody in your organization to be a higher performer than they are today, regardless of their baseline?
Yeah. And I also think that, the Interflection technology, and then the bigger conversation around AI, can provide that just-in-time coaching around communication skills, which we know organizations are struggling with. And as generations who are growing up becoming more communication savvy in writing texts or emails, learning how to communicate effectively in spoken language it's going to continue to be a critical area for development.
It's absolutely a differentiator when you're collaborating, when you're, trying to manage people, when you're trying to be managed. Even if you're an individual contributor, if you're not good at accepting feedback, knowing how to receive feedback in a way that you can take constructively and make yourself better, that's a career limiting feature of your skill set, and that's not a good thing. And this is actually, I think we've moved into that third realm that I mentioned at the beginning, which is how do you use this technology to help to change the way that people are learning today? So, you mentioned Interflection. I'm going to take a moment here and talk a little bit about what we're doing, which is you're engaged in a role play situation, any kind of workplace conversation. It's like a FaceTime or Zoom call or a phone call. Right. And you're confronted by a call. It could be you're on a sales call and you're talking to a prospect. It could be that you've got to give a performance review to one of your people. It could be your manager wants an update on a project, whatever it might be. And you have to respond in your natural voice as if you're actually on a phone call with this person or a Zoom call with this person. And it analyzes the content of what you say. Did you take the right perspective on the issue? Did you convey the right ideas? Did you ask a meaningful question to move the conversation along? Those kinds of things to ensure that you're, doing the right things in conversation. And it gives you immediate feedback and allows you to practice, to see what you looked like and sounded like. It has like a model that you can watch a video of someone giving an effective response so that you can say, oh, I got it now, and go back and practice. We're very excited about not only the growth that we see people having, but also some of what we've been able to discover about how people apply what they learn in the classroom to conversations they have in the workplace. So this is to your point, Allison, this is something that people use just in time. We see that people practice during training, but then they have to have that conversation. Suddenly they're using the app again before the conversation just to brush up.
And I think what's fascinating about your technology is that you can, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about this, an employer can actually create the competencies or the criteria that you're looking for in the correct response. So whether you want
Yeah.
the response to convey empathy or you want the response to convey some of the things that you just articulated, and it will evaluate the individual's response based on that established criteria.
We knew when we got started that these large language models had the kinds of biases and hallucinations, and that was not going to go away anytime soon. So this was built with the idea that the organization would be able to establish the guardrails and the rules of the road for, what is it looking for and how does it give feedback around that makes it more specific to what you want them to learn. There are so many things going on in a conversation, from, sentiment to, implied questions and so forth. This allows you to determine what's important, what's the crucial moment here, and what makes that a crucial moment, and that's what you focus on. And you can't worry about everything that happens in the conversation. So it allows you to control, and it provides transparency around the decision making that the AI is doing.
And I have to say, I tried it out, and I consider myself a pretty effective communicator. And I was also really interested to hear the feedback that it gave me on the response that I chose for the scenario. And it was incredibly insightful. So I just want to go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so it does, I just wanted to get clear, it does tone and facial expression and everything, or is it?
It's based on the words that you use.
Okay.
It does not analyze facial expressions.
Okay.
That is not the research we've done, that is not a reliable indicator today of underlying intent, or it's like polygraphs, not really reliable. So we focus on the words that you use.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to be clear because I was thinking about that, and so that's really, if it did all that too, that would be even crazier. But it's amazing.
There's a lot going on. Just let this model be trained on something, and we don't know what it's doing. We are giving you the ability to provide guardrails and rules of what's being evaluated. There has to be a connection between those rules and what's being evaluated and the behavior that's being measured. And that's the challenge.
Well, and that's the big overarching challenge or concern that people have about AI, is about the guardrails, correct? I mean, it's just that, the deep fakes and all those things that can happen. So
that's right. So we were aware of those issues from the beginning, and we worked to make sure that would, not become a problem for our users and learners.
For anyone who is listening, John, what are the 3 best pieces of advice, 2 or 3 best pieces of advice for someone listening who wants to begin this journey or continue the journey to introduce AI as a tool in their organization?
The first thing is be hands-on. You need to see this technology for yourself and play with it. You don't have to necessarily use it to create things you use in the workplace, but you should see what it would look like if you asked it to create things in the workplace, and just get a sense of the power and the limitations of the technology. So I think that's like number one. The second thing you should do, locate another group in your larger organization that would be open to having you come in and help them become more effective with AI. Not just prompting, but also its responsible use and how it fits into their processes. And use that as a template going forward. The third thing you should do is be prepared for some hard questions from executive and senior leadership, because at some point they're going to ask about whether you're ready to, what you've done with, where's AI going in your organization, however it gets phrased, you should be able to say to your senior management, whether you're in HR or learning and development, or even in an operational capacity, this is what we've done so far to look into it. This is where we think it's going to make a huge difference in our productivity. And these are the steps we're taking to prove that out and discover the most effective and responsible uses for it in our organization. Because if you can't talk about those things when those questions come to you, that's not going to be a fun conversation.
John Heck, Chief Technology Officer at Interflection, thank you so much for earning the title of AI Whisperer on today's podcast. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and advice.
Well, thank you for inviting me on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you, and really looking forward to the whole season series.
Well, back, because I think this is just going to be the first of many conversations we have as AI continues to accelerate and become more prominent in our organization. So we thank you so much for your time. Doug, thank you for being my co-host once again.
I had an amazing time, John. I'm flabbergasted and interested, and I want to go create something on AI now. So thanks for lighting that fire.
Oh, you're welcome, Doug. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you as well.
Thank you.
And to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and until next time.